As our panelists were mentioning earlier on, disclosure doesn't take place in a binary manner. So our learning is going to continue. It didn't end at break time. So whatever thoughts that you have picked up, do remember it and temper it as we go through the next two cases. And together, we hope it will provide a comprehensive set of learning. Welcome back, Vanessa, Chinchia, and Dave. Let's proceed now to Mr. Tox, who is going to teach us a few things. So Mr. Tox is 47 years of age and has a successful landscaping business. For the past 2 years, he has been suffering from thyrotoxicosis, but it has not been well controlled with medications. Consequently, his mood is often altered, he's easily agitated, and he often feels tired despite eating well, he is losing weight. More recently, he has begun to suffer side effects from the medications, including painful mouth ulcers and recurrent upper abdominal pain. Mr. Tox is fed up with feeling poorly and would ideally like a solution that can resolve all his problems. Prof. Thai is an experienced thyroid surgeon who has performed hundreds of thyroidectomies, and the majority of her patients are able to go home on the third day after surgery. About 5% of them may have non-life-threatening bleeding or infection. About 1% have hoarseness due to mild injury to the recurrent laryngeal nerve. The effect usually lasts about 6 weeks. In a tenth of those who suffer this hoarseness, the injury is more severe and the hoarseness will probably not resolve. This is usually due to an aberrant nerve that is inadvertently cut during surgery. This frequency of permanent hoarseness is the same in the hands of all the best surgeons. An alternative to thyroidectomy is radioactive ablation of the thyroid gland. It will take about 3 months for the symptoms to be fully controlled. During this time, medications will need to be continued, probably at a lower dose. The long-term significant side effects of ablation treatment is dry mouth in about 10% of patients and suspicions of a very slightly higher incidence of malignancy. Mr. Tox is a member of the Singapore Symphony Orchestra choir, and he actively engages in this hobby at least twice weekly. Apart from landscaping, singing is his passion. This information is actually not in his medical records. So let's now begin our discussions maybe with a question from us. And let's start with Dr. Tan, for whom thyroidectomy or thyroid surgery is his passion and expertise. I was going to use the word hobby, but that would be very unfair. So, Dr. Tan, should Prof. Thai present both treatment modality options to Mr. Tox?
Thanks, Prof. Maybe I would just like to describe what I do in a patient like this and then hopefully maybe you can even try to jump the gun and answer some of the questions, not just question one. I see this quite often in my clinic, and these patients are actually referred to me by an endocrinologist. So the very fact that they've been referred means there has already been a selection process involved, and they're referred to me for surgery. When I see a patient like that, what I always do is I would actually present the treatment options again, meaning in this case, radiation treatment versus surgery and the pros and cons of each. And in surgery, I would actually highlight the risk of the nerve injury and affecting the voice, causing hoarseness. And this is where I actually would put in a bit more effort to, I think they brought up earlier about what the doctor says may not always be what the patient registers or understands. And besides just mentioning that there's a risk of hoarseness, I would go into a bit more details on the effects of hoarseness on the patient's life. The patient will not be able to sing, will have difficulty with speech. There will be difficulty in communication at times because the voice quality is very poor. And in this discussion, what I noticed is that patients would start asking questions, and they will even ask me whether how would they be affected. Then they may even volunteer information like they like to sing, they go to a karaoke. Unfortunately, so far I haven't had any professional singers. And then from then on, I will make a recommendation. My observation is that I don't think I'm alone in this kind of practice, because these patients, as I mentioned, they were usually referred to me by a colleague, an endocrinologist. And when I look at the notes that's been written, documented, and very often the endocrinologist would already have gone through this whole process of going through the treatment options, and then because of the discussion with the patient, arrive to the decision for surgery. Thanks, Prof.
Thank you. Dr. Dave,
yes.
What else? There would be equivalence in your specialty also. What more would you like to add to what Chunche has shared with us?
Well, I think first of all, let me highlight some of the important things that Chunche has pointed out. One, that, what is said and what is understood, trying to get that on the same page. Second, the information given to the patient is not necessarily only given by one clinician or one surgeon. It is often given by a team, and there is a treatment journey. And again, in order just from this, this vignette to make any conclusions is very challenging, because you don't know what kind of information has been given to the patient in terms of the alternatives. In this case, radioactive iodine, because there are a number of short-term, long-term, rare, severe side effects, which are all possible with radioactive iodine as well. And if you want patients to be able to make considered decisions, you need to be able to give them balanced views, and where appropriate, and if there is a clear professional opinion, you should also, if they want, give them a clear recommendation on what we think is the best and justifications for it, right? In the literature on patient decision making shows that most of the time patients don't want, Chunche will probably tell you this as well. Most of the time patients will leave it up to the doctor to make the decisions for them. Most patients, regardless of what, the law says, most patients say, I trust you, doctor, you tell me what to do, we will do. But the literature shows that even when patients do that, they still have a sense of ownership for the decisions. They still retain that, that autonomy preserving element for two reasons. One is their clinician gives them justifications for the recommendation. So the patient says, okay, I leave it in your hands, but you've given me reasons why I should trust you. And the second is that the patients know that they are allowed to refuse. They're not, the information is not painted in a way such that if you don't do this, you are done for, where that is obviously not the case. So if those two things are present, patients actually retain a sense of ownership. And again, I know we are here to talk about the law as well, but hopefully we can reach the stage where, we won't go near, having to deal with medical legal disputes. And if patients feel that they have a sense of ownership over the decisions, it is less likely that even if something unfortunate happens, they will, they will resort to the, litigation and so on.
Thank you. Thank you, Dave. So we now have a fairly clear idea of how the patient comes, the knowledge with which the patient comes, and what the physician is going to do. So, whether, sir, if the physicians have undertaken all these things and really provided information that enables them to either say, look, I'm happy with what you have told me. I think I accept your recommendation to do this or do that. And all these are documented. Do you see anything else that the law may require of the physicians? Or have we done our job?
I think you've done your job. The law is really not there to be onerous, or it's not there to try and catch a doctor, you messed up. That's really not what we're trying to do. And I know a lot of doctors don't like us lawyers, but we're really here to help. And I just wanted to pick up on what Dave said. So a good doctor-patient relationship underpins everything. When there is that genuine communication, and there is, the patients feel the care that the doctors have for them, and the genuine care and concern that is shown. When there's a good doctor-patient relationship, a lot of things can be dealt with. When that has been built, there's trust, there's communication. Even if there's an adverse outcome, in the work that I do, it's very easy to get everyone together, have a family conference, or even have a mediation, and everyone talks about it, and the patient gets closure. It is often only when the patient feels slighted, the patient feels ignored, the patient feels like the doctor didn't give him or her the time of day, the patient felt that the doctor was dismissive of his or her complaints, that matters escalate. And when it comes to that situation, you're not really just dealing with the medical issues or the legal issues. You're really dealing, with pain, with hurt, with betrayal. And that is sometimes what fuels litigation, not so much the medical or, legal issues, but it's because of what has happened to the doctor-patient relationship. So, if you practice as what we have been discussing at a higher at the standard that you should, the law is really there to help you, and it's not going to come and get you or put you down.
Okay, thank you. I think that's what most of us do understand, and it's reassuring to know that the new law also is in that spirit. Okay, so now let's move a little bit further. And this is something which sometimes I think many of us will find that physicians get a little bit jittery. And that is, can or should Prof. Thai recommend one treatment option over the other to Mr. Tox? Okay, so obviously this is a statement without any context. And maybe I'll put the question first to the physicians. Chunchia, you began by describing your practice. And now that you have spoken to the patient, seen what the endocrinologists have said, and these sort of things, do you recommend? And if you recommend, how do you present the recommendation?
I would say that generally, I do recommend. In fact, I think this as professionals, be a doctor, allied health professional, as professionals, we do have to accept that we have got additional training and knowledge compared to the patient. And it is, in fact, maybe our duty our job to put forward a recommendation, because to help patient rationalize and come up with a decision at the end of the discussion. But at the same time, when we make a recommendation, we have to recognize that patients do have the right to autonomy, and then patients are not all the same. Some will have their own beliefs, and we must respect that. So a recommendation does not, well, I would say a recommendation does not mean advocacy. Yeah, we can support a certain line of treatment, but doesn't mean we should push hard and advocate a particular path if the patient himself herself has expressed reservations. So when I put forward a recommendation, I don't think it's very different from what most people would do, or my colleagues would do. It's basically to line up the pros and cons, the risks and benefits of the treatment plan, and then to try to tie in the patient factors onto why I feel that treatment plan is better for the patient. In this case of thyroidectomy, for instance, if the patient likes to sing but it's a hobby, I would say that I would still recommend surgery, because singing, well, as a hobby, maybe the standards the patient aspires to achieve may not be as high as compared to a professional singer. So the patient has got his or her own standards. But if it's a case of a professional singer, then my recommendation may be a bit slightly different. I would have to factor in the consideration that even if the hoarseness is transient, it could take months, 3 to 6 months to recover, and that could have an impact on the patient's life in terms of finances and the other commitments that I'm not aware of.
Thank you. Dave, what would you like to add to that? What have you in practice been doing?
Yeah, I think that, if we think about, what actually happens in one of these consultations, you can think about treatment decision making as having 3 phases. There's first an information exchange phase, physicians understanding what's important to the patients. In this case, singing and lack of control with just medication. There's the information exchange in the opposite direction, the risk and benefits and the alternatives that are out there. There's a deliberation phase, and then there is a decision on treatment. And if we think about this, right, I mean, it's very easy to, I know doctors go on and on about, Hitchcock and now Section 37, so many new demands on doctors and so on. But I think what is underappreciated is the kind of demands that are on patients. Because if you are a patient, right, this means that, if you're going to give the patient a lot of information and let them take responsibility for the decisions, they need to be able to understand outcomes, sometimes in statistical terms. They need to understand uncertainties in medicine. They also need to understand their own personal values. Like Chunchie says, is singing more important? Is, a thyroid control and mood disturbance more important? They need to be able to balance these values and preferences. Then they need to use all this information in a deliberative process. And I can tell you, the vast majority of people in this world do not, list everything out, pros, cons, and, have a balancing scale. Most of us use heuristics to make decisions. We use the most available and the most satisfying, option that's available. And then at the end of the day, there's also a communicative component to this that the patients have. They must be able to communicate these decisions back to the physicians. So if you think about all these things, it is no wonder that in true clinical practice, and in my practice anyway, and I'm sure Chunchie will tell you, even for thyroidectomies, most of the patients depend heavily on their doctors and their clinicians to help them make the decisions, and literally sometimes make the decisions on their behalf. Of course, as I said before, that doesn't necessarily mean that it is autonomy impeding. It can still be autonomy supportive if you make the decisions in the right way for the patients. And I think that in my own personal belief is that it is very challenging, for us to try and learn medicine from the law, right? We need to know the law. This session is really important. We need to understand Hitchcock and so on. But if you try and say, based on the law, I need to do this, based on the law, I need to do that in clinical practice, it's going to fall flat. And the reason for that is the law is very, very precise. It is very logical. It's very step-by-step. It's forensic in breaking down steps. You analyze the value of certain words and phrases and so on. But medicine, in truth, is very, fudgeable, and there are many gray areas in almost any practice of medicine. And when we think about just information exchange alone, there are many genuine tensions that exist. I mean, for example, in goal setting, what we think is the best goal for the patient may not be what the patient wants, and what the patient wants may not be in their best interest. And if they choose something that's against their best interest, their subsequent decisions are going to be affected. Similarly, we think about information exchange like these risks and benefits as if there's a fact. And the truth is, it's not a fact. The risk of injury to the nerve, as Chunxia will tell you, depends also on the anatomy of the patient. If the patient has got a certain habitus, the risk may be different. If the patient has got a bleeding tendency, the risk is different. So, and Chunxia will not be able to give any individual patient based on you for this risk is going to be X number of percent. He's only going to be able to give statistical information about risk that that patients in this class would have, and that is not contextualized to the patient in front of them. And then there are many other things as well. Patients want to be told the truth but cannot handle a lot of information. Patients want to be told the truth but also want hope, and there's so many tensions that happen, and that is why we are in the practice of medicine, to help people manage these tensions. And all of these are fudgeable. So you cannot say that, oh, you use the precise wording of the law and I'm going to be able to translate that to a precise model answer for any situation on what to give. You need, as Vanessa said, you need to build good relationships. As Chunxia said, you need to communicate honestly with the patient. You need to work as part of a team. Then you can get good decisions. And as part of that, I see that it's very obvious to me that clinicians should make recommendations, especially when there's one clear recommendation, a clear medical way forward. So that's sort of my take on making recommendations.
Thank you. Now, we have heard two very experienced clinicians describe how they will approach this, right? And it seems to be, in my mind, if we can do this with all our patients, Vanessa and company will have not much to do. Okay, but what I'd like to ask Vanessa is there anything in either Hitchcock or Section 37 that we can glean and add to our process to make our process even more robust? So I'm looking at it from the opposite, because you said the law helps us. Generally, we are thinking of the law trying to put a noose around our neck. So here, let's see if you could tell us, is there anything there that we can add to our armamentarium?
Well, I suppose as a practical tip. So in Hitchcock, the Court of Appeal talks about why the test for advice is different from the test for treatment and diagnosis. And that is because for advice, the patient should be an active participant, and the decision should be arrived at together by the clinician working with the patient. So in terms of what can be done, I do think when it comes to advice, it helps if the doctor puts himself in the shoes of the patient. And I know it's difficult because you've lived your life in the jargon, you know all the treatment and you know all the statistics. But I suppose from a starting point is to put yourself in the shoes of the patient and ask, what would the patient want to know? And the Court of Appeal does go into quite a lot of detail about why this should be done in the decision of Hitchcock. So you put yourself in the shoes of the patient and ask yourself, what would a patient want to know if he is going to undergo this treatment or if he has this condition? So in the case scenarios that we have been exploring, what I found interesting was, sometimes like in this case scenario, he likes to sing as a hobby, right? So it's not as if he depends on his voice for his livelihood. So if a doctor is going to ask, oh, what do you do for a living? What's your occupation? He might not actually get the information or, the fact that the voice is important to the patient. Of course, the side point is the voice is important to all of us. It's fundamental to how we present ourselves. But sometimes if a doctor asks, what do you do or what is your occupation, that might not necessarily cover a lot of ground, right? So I think the key point is when you share information or you ask questions, it should be in relation to the functions that will be impacted by the treatment, right? So it has to be specific, or there has to be some context to it. And it's not as if you have to keep asking questions or, you have to do endless probing. I think you should focus on what the treatment will impact and start from there.
Thank you. I think we have a very powerful question from the floor. That's question 1. Could we project that, please? Or shall I read it out? All right, maybe, okay, fine. No, not this, the one before that. Joe, not this one, the one before that. Basically it says, if by asking more questions, we get more information, then the whole thing, yes. If by asking more questions, medical professionals expose themselves to a greater duty to disclose as they better ascertain patient values, is it then safer for them to only probe the bare minimum that is expected of them? Thank you so much for this question. It has got considerable depth. Maybe let's go to our panel.
Well, I think the starting point is that the duty is the same. You don't have a more onerous duty just because you've asked questions. In fact, you should be asking questions, right? You should be asking questions so that you know your patient. If not, we can have robots dispensing medical advice and just going through, the standard items that need to be covered. So I don't quite agree with the question or the premise of the question.
All right. Thank you so much. Dave, how would you like to respond to that question?
In very much the same way, because this shouldn't be a race to the bottom. Don't tell, don't ask, don't tell. That doesn't help. I mean, we are here to help patients, first, and also not to run into trouble with the law. So by not knowing enough about the patient, and just because you didn't know you may have a way out. That's a very sad way of practicing medicine. We should be doing what's in our patient's best interest. And if we think that some questions are relevant and important, we should absolutely be asking them, not trying to be, not trying to hedge things just because we think we might get off easy on the law. And I also think that this highlights another issue, which is sort of defensive medicine. So when doctors try and practice medicine by thinking about the law, which is in many ways what defensive medicine is about, they almost always run into trouble. I mean, statistically, that's true. So there is data to prove that, to show this. So we should be practicing medicine how medicine should be practiced. We should be counseling patients for thyroid surgery the way thyroid surgeons do it, right? And we should be doing it in order to promote the patient's autonomy, to give them the information they need so that they make good decisions for themselves. That is the essence of medicine. The moment we try and use the law to try and tell us what not to do, what to do, and try to hedge on the on one or other things, almost always we get in trouble. And as you just heard, what the lawyers think of that.
Thank you. So Chunxie,
sorry,
you could. Oh, sorry. Yeah, please, Vanessa, go ahead.
That in the case of Hitchcock, right? Don't forget that the doctor was found, the appeal was dismissed, meaning the court stood by what the doctors did. So even before they implemented the new test, based on what Dr. London Lucien Wee had done in Hitchcock, the court said, yep, he had advised the patient as he should, everything was done, and the patient did not succeed in his claim. So if doctors do what they are supposed to do, the court or the law is very ready to stand behind them.
Okay, thanks. Chunxie, maybe I'd just like you to build on this in the sense that, it started by saying, I can see the sincerity behind that question. It is actually about going into practicalities. So maybe you can share with us, how often do you come into a situation where, as a result of you adopting an open manner, where you keep on asking questions, and you reveal, and the patient reveals more, and then both you and the patient run into trouble. Not legal trouble, either the consultation goes long. How do you handle these? So basically, how uncomfortable or how impracticable is this approach of putting questions to patients?
Oh, okay. Maybe I can only share a story.
Okay, please.
Okay.
Narratives are very important.
Okay, it reminds me of a case I had where it was actually a thyroidectomy patient, and where we talk about the nerve injury. It all started with nerve injury, the discussion on the complication risk, and also mentioned to the patient that it's a low risk. And then because I emphasized that there will be, if it happens, if it's rare, it happens, it will be hoarseness, and the hoarseness can be permanent. And that's where I brought on the fact that I illustrated a bit more. I told the patient, no, if you have a hoarse voice, you may find it difficult to speak. And that was at that point in time, the patient herself told me that, actually, I like to sing as a hobby in the church choir. And then when I heard that, I immediately moved on and said, the hoarseness will definitely affect your singing, and you may have to accept the fact that you will never be able to sing, even as a hobby. And after some pondering, the patient said, yeah, it's okay. What happened subsequently was that the patient did have transient hoarseness, and it lasted for about 6 months to a year. And during this period, each time I was seeing the patient on a regular basis, and I was asking the patient how it was after the surgery, and I specifically asked her about her singing. And each time I asked her, she said, yeah, she told me very frankly that she has difficulty singing, she has difficulty projecting her voice, but she told me that it's okay because she's aware of that. So I think if I were to go back to the question about whether we should try to get by with the bare minimum, I don't think that's the way to go. I feel that we asking directed questions or selective use of questioning does actually help to prevent us from getting in trouble.
Okay, thank you, Sam. I mean, if we really want to be patient-centered, we need to know who the patient is and what the patient values, isn't it? Rather than what we value. Thank you so much. Maybe let's move to, is there another question, Sumi?
Yes, there is actually.
Yes. I think this is good. I think it comes from that. Is the patient deemed to hold equal responsibility in revealing information to the doctor during consultation in the same way the doctor is expected to obtain as much information as possible to assess and recommend the best possible care to the patient? This is recognizing that patient has the choice as to what they reveal, and it is also possible that the patient may not know what is relevant information to reveal. So may I now approach the panel? We started with we accepted the premise, the value of asking questions. So now, and having realized the value of that, maybe you would like to see how that helps to answer our present question about the patient deemed to hold equal responsibility. Maybe Dave, would you like to start here?
Okay. Yeah. I think that where the starting point for all of this is that the clinician and the patient needs to have a shared understanding of the problem, right? And if they don't have, if the clinician thinks the problem is this X and Y, and the patient thinks the problem is A and B, that's when, patients don't understand what information needs to be given, and clinicians are, feel that they've got to end up asking an endless series of questions in order to try and make sure that, that the patient's genuine concerns are being met. So And again, I think that perhaps unfairly, a lot of, in Hitchcock and Section 37 has focused on the recommendations, the alternatives, and the risk, but little has been said about diagnosis and prognosis. And although, I mean, if you do look at Hitchcock in terms of what is material information, Hitchcock quotes from a Canadian case called Dixon and Pinder, which includes diagnosis and prognosis. So, and I think that is very wise, that if you don't have this common understanding of what the issue is, then it's very hard to move forward. Now, if despite having a common understanding and having open communication, if the patient were to deliberately conceal information from the doctor, they're only harming themselves. And I cannot imagine why the court would hold healthcare professionals responsible or wholly responsible if the patient deliberately went ahead to conceal information that was relevant.
Thank you, Dave. Maybe Vanessa, would you agree with that position?
Yes, completely. So the patient is expected to participate, and if a doctor is asking questions and the patient is reticent or the patient doesn't share, then I really don't see how the healthcare professional can be faulted.
Okay, maybe Chun Chia. Thank you so much, Vanessa. So Chun Chia, how have you dealt with patients who, for whatever reason, were a little reluctant?
Sorry, could you? I didn't quite.
Sorry.
Yes.
How have you dealt with patients who don't seem to want to disclose? You put a question and they run away from the question, and all sorts of things like that. But their answer is vital. So just like we say, we have to encourage people to make the statement. We have to come to the level where capacity is present. What do you do to get these uncooperative and silent people to reveal more so that a better decision can be made?
Okay, maybe I can answer that with two words: time and space.
Time and space, good.
Yeah, because if a lot of this happen, well, with the luxury of time in the consultation, what I normally would do is to actually just present these options, discussion and information to the patient, and then just tell the patient that, hey, you can go back and think about it. You don't need to make a decision today. And then as to how much time the patient has to consider, then that will probably be it depends on the condition, that whether it's a time-sensitive treatment. And then I'll arrange for the patient to come back again with a decision.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for bringing up time and space. There is, we also, efficiency, productivity are also important. And I think there is no shortage of stories about patients who say they went to see the doctor and doctor said, hey, yeah, this is your problem. Actually, all you need is a simple procedure. It's about 12. Why don't you and I have lunch and we'll come back at 2 o'clock and get this done? Okay. Maybe for some procedures, it's all right. But is this generally moving a little bit too fast? Because patients really don't have time. You and I can sort these out maybe in 1 or 2 hours. But for a patient, first time making decisions like this, are these so-called shotgun procedures. We had shotgun marriages. So like this shotgun, are they generally to be discouraged? Oh, okay, it's open, is it? Chen Xie?
Fortunately, I think such situations are not so common, to have a patient who is really out to withhold information, and it's a lot of it it depends on the rapport that is built up during the consultation, and I think most doctors will be able to get a sense by the end of even after 10 or 15-minute talk on whether the patient is ready or not to take the plunge. And yeah, I think it depends very much on the feeling. It's there's no, I don't have a formula, but I do, in my case, it's go by the feeling kind of impression at the end of the discussion, or the force.
All right.
If the force is there. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I think we have come to, how much more time we have? Only a few minutes left.
We have a few minutes, and we do have quite an interesting question.
Yes. Can we put question 13 up, please?
Or maybe, Roy, I'll just read it if that's
Yes. I mean, I was letting everybody read. I've got hoarseness.
You got hoarseness. So this one is about the risk of permanent hoarseness, right, which is less than 0.1%, but it could be considered significant to almost everyone, not just singers. So should this risk be mentioned to all patients? And the next part of the question is well, it is kind of related, but before we jump into that, sorry, I'm going to exercise a bit of chair's privilege, just ask this one question, right? Your ordinary layperson may not know that something like a thyroidectomy could potentially affect the vocal cords, right? So they may not know it's important for them to say, singing is my passion, it's my hobby, right? They may not know that it's important to reveal that. So to what extent should the doctor be probing for information like this? And that sort of plays into the second part of the question about, the extent to which risks need to be disclosed, because from the patient's perspective, it's material if it happens to them. So how far does this go? So Roy, let me just hand it back over to you.
Yep. Yeah. Thanks, Sumi. Chinchia, since this is your area, can we request you to?
Okay. I think actually Vanessa can add on to this later on, but I thought the law has already answered these questions, and that even if the risk is low, but the effect or the consequence, the extent of harm is great, there's an obligation for the doctor to review. So there's two parts to it. One is a low risk, but the second factor that comes in, it must be a high, it must be something that is of serious consequences or even catastrophic. And if I'm not wrong, I thought Rogers, Whittaker is a bit like that. The risk of blindness is low, but if the patient has got only one eye left, that is most precious, and we have to contextualize. So just looking at being a low risk itself is inadequate. We must also assess the extent of harm, and the extent of harm has got to be tailored to the patient's physical characteristics and context.
Thank you. Vanessa, please.
I think just to round back to this case scenario, I think what is crucial in this case is that voice affects, it's pretty fundamental to, the person. It affects everyday life, and it's part of a person's ability to communicate. So I would think that is why it would need to be communicated to the patient. It's because of the impact of that harm.
Yeah, thank you so much. One of my colleagues, when teaching you, said, the emphasis is not the complication. The emphasis should always be the impact. And as doctors, we are also human beings. First of all, we should ask ourselves, if this happened to me, how will it impact me? And that's a good starting point. And from there, we put it to the patient, and the patient will then reveal how important that impact is and what we can do with that. Okay, I think we have come to the end of our time, and I think the short summary of this thing is: ask questions. They're very, very helpful. The less questions you ask, the more likely you are going to be acting in your interest rather than in the patient's best interest. You're going to assume you know what is in the patient's best interest. Okay? So I think that is, and that's the only way we will know what is important for them. So with that, I'd like to end this session, and we thank Mr. Tox and Dr. Prof. Thairo. And let's move to our last case. Sumi, will you take over?